How do our most senior leaders feel about the direction and trajectory of our industry? What's their outlook on the future state of wholesaling, and, based on their considerable experiences, what lessons would they help us all learn? That's what we want to find out in this special series of episodes we're calling Lessons from Leaders. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. This episode of Lessons from Leaders is sponsored by the Money Management Institute and their Center for Distribution Excellence. MMI is the industry association that connects all participants, including asset managers, platform sponsors, and technology providers in the always changing and rapidly growing advisory solutions world. The new Center for Distribution Excellence, built by and for financial industry sales professionals, is dedicated to discovering, promoting, and improving best practices in the wholesaling community. In Industry First, the Center brings together a comprehensive suite of events, networking opportunities, and educational resources, all designed to help sales professionals interact with their counterparts from across the industry and learn from the best of the best. For more information about the Center for Distribution Excellence, call MMI at 646-868-8500. That's 646-868-8500, or visit MMINST.org. Wholesalers, I couldn't be more delighted to welcome you to the inaugural episode of Lessons from Leaders. See, what we're going to do in this series from the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show is I'm going to ask 6 questions, the same 6 questions, to assorted leaders throughout our industry. I want to know more about what they're thinking, about what's going on today and what should be coming up tomorrow. And for this first episode, we've got a wildly impressive trifecta for you. You see, this show is sponsored by MMI, Money Management Institute, and these 3 gentlemen are pivotal in the programming and participation and membership of MMI. And MMI was insistent, and who was I to argue, that we had all 3 of these gentlemen on the line at the same time for the inaugural episode of Lessons from Leaders. So if you will, let me introduce each of them. Jon Moniker is Managing Director, Retail Sales for Eaton Vance. Jon joined Eaton Vance in 2012. He's responsible for setting the strategic direction for and the day-to-day oversight of all sales and relationship management within Eaton Vance's brokerage, independent, and RIA channels, and oversees the Eaton Vance Advisor Institute. His leadership is focused on enhancing sales reach and relationships while building on Eaton Vance's client-oriented solutions across the full range of intermediaries. Mark Spina is with us. Mark is the head of Advisor and Intermediary Solutions for Russell Investments. Mark's the senior executive responsible for leading and expanding Russell Investments' U.S. advisor-focused business and the firm's client relationships in the wealth management, RIA, bank, and retirement channels. He's a member of the firm's Global Executive and Global Risk Committees. He also serves as trustee of the Russell Investments Company Mutual Fund Board. Mr. Spina, who joined Russell Investments in 2016, reports directly to the CEO, and he's based in New York City. Brett Wright is here. Brett is co-head of Client Group Macquarie Investment Management Americas. Mark is co-head of Macquarie's Client Group in the Americas, which includes the firm's sales, service, marketing, and product teams. In this role, he leads all retail, institutional, and client service functions for Macquarie Investment Management, which includes the former Delaware Investments. Prior to assuming this role from 2014 July to June 2016, Brett was responsible for third-party broker-dealer distribution activities to wirehouses, regional independent firms, as well as key account management with major distribution partners. Gentlemen, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show.
Thank you for having us.
Delighted that you gentlemen could be here, all 3 of you guys. So we're going to have us a chat. It's the 6 questions that we want to ask. We want to know what's on your mind. So the first question that I have for you on Lessons from Leaders is, are you bullish or bearish on wholesaling? And we'll poke around your answers to that. Jon Moniker, what are your thoughts on that? You bullish or bearish on wholesaling?
Oh man, I'm really bullish. I think more than ever, it's all about. It's harder than ever to get in the doors, and anyone listening to this will attest to the fact that relationships matter more than ever. I think couple that with the technical expertise you need to get in those doors, but relationships matter. Having wholesalers matters. It's one of the single most important things we have in distribution is to make sure we can get through those doors and add value to those advisors so they'll work with us for a long period of time. We'll get into more of it, but completely bullish.
So, Mark, Jon's bullish. Do you share his sentiment? And if you do, why?
Yeah, Rob, I usually don't mind taking the other side of the trade with Jon, but on this one, we're definitely in agreement. I am bullish on wholesaling. In addition to the reasons Jon put forth, I'd say there is a number of transitions taking place that advisors need help with, and wholesalers are well positioned to help with those transitions. There's a ongoing transition to advice. There's a transition from individual asset classes to outcomes, from individual producers to teams, from one firm to another firm, from one channel to another channel. And importantly, maybe most important when you look at the overall advisor demographic, helping advisors transition to the next generation of advisors. So in addition to investment solutions, I think wholesalers are going to be central to helping advisors with all these transitions taking place.
Brett, what's your take?
Boy, tough to disagree with either Rob or Jon, and I would, having carried the bag myself many years ago, would be extremely bullish, and for the reasons that were stated, but I'll just add one thing as a caveat. Relationships where it's institutional or retail are just so paramount nowadays. Everyone is so pressed for time. It's hard to get access, and having someone that has an entree to that door is just vitally important. And so we put extreme value on that relationship. The caveat, though, is the game is changing. Relationship management at the wholesaler level is less about, as you talk about a lot, Rob, about golf and dinners and lunches. It's more about delivering value. And then, as Mark alluded to, the rising sophistication of advisory teams has led us in terms of how we think through. It almost is the institutionalization of the retail marketplace. So just to close, extremely bullish, couldn't say enough about it.
No, I'm glad you put an asterisk on it, because as I appreciate the bullishness that you gentlemen share, one of our upcoming episodes is with the guys from Cerulli, and I recorded that earlier. And we had a great conversation about what's coming and how the landscape is changing. As a matter of fact, you all heard about that at the MMI forum back in February. So I'm glad you put the asterisk on it, because while I think we all agree, and you guys are obviously infinitely closer to it day to day than I am, while we all agree there's bullishness in the air, it's not with some adaptation that's going to come on behalf of both leadership and wholesalers. Wouldn't that be the case?
Yeah, I think Brett hit it on the head. The asterisk, I think, makes a lot of sense. It is changing, and I think the way that wholesalers engage advisors, certainly the transition that Mark was talking about, I think is a big one. There are a ton of transitions. I think on top of that, as you look at the quality of the people we are going to need in the future, the number of people we'll need in the future, the specialists that surround the business in the future, the traditional wholesaler is going to change. And I think, Brett, you mentioned the old just a relationship manager alone isn't going to be enough. So if you were to recast the question and say, are you bullish or bearish on the traditional old school way of wholesaling, I'd say I'd be bearish.
Yeah.
If you're bullish on what I think the future looks like, I think wholesaling will matter more than ever, and I think the way we're thinking about it is across all of us is in a much more advanced way.
While you've got the mic, let's stay with you for just a second. Let's go out those 5 years. Let's go out those 5 years. Let's kind of spit shine the crystal ball. What is our industry? What does our industry look like? Meaning, how do you think it changes? What are some of the most pronounced changes as a senior leader that you think we're going to experience over the next 5 years?
Wow, this one we might take the rest of your call, Rob, but let's start with a few maybe. So let's start maybe with advisors. Yeah, I think advisory, you mentioned out of the gate, advisor practices are going to continue to consolidate at a rapid rate, largely in the back of just simply demographics, right? They're retiring, they're consolidating. So forget the broker-dealer consolidation. Just practices are consolidating, which means they're getting bigger, they're getting more influential, they're getting more centralized in decision-making. So teams are getting larger, which means we now have to be working with the biggest and best teams today in order to be successful in 5 years. If you're not today, you're in trouble. Investor demographics alongside of that are shifting as well, right? So their needs and desires are changing. The requirements for customization and personalization matter more than ever. That in 5 years will be even more dramatic. So I think both the advisor look and feel, what are we working against, is going to change materially. The investor sophistication is only going to get more. And then strategies that follow that, what does the product set look like? We'll have to meet those demands and needs, I think, in a much bigger way. And therefore, if you go back to the wholesaling question, the needs of our teams to be much more sophisticated in the way they engage advisors, the level that they have to work with in terms of the analysts on these teams will be more prevalent than ever, which I think will change the way we train, the way we think about building our capabilities to square off against these teams.
Mark, how would you bring in your thoughts as they line up with or not against, certainly, but juxtaposed to Jon's?
Yeah, I would say that I think a few things, Rob, right? When you look out 5 years, I think there's a tendency to assume that there's going to be some sort of cliff vesting change that takes place. And I think it's much more of a stair-step type of function. And to focus on one element of it, I would say technology, both from the advisor perspective and the wholesaler perspective. So from the advisor perspective, there's going to be an expectation for the advisor, and to Jon's point, the team, the sophisticated advisor, to be able to develop and deliver increasing customization, increasing personalization, more of an outcomes orientation for their client portfolios, moving away from simple benchmarks to are we meeting the holistic wealth management objectives of our clients? And at once, that's going to have to be very personalized and technologically enabled. And as such, right, the wholesaler interacting with those individuals, interacting with those teams, is going to have to be technology enabled themselves. And that's from every dimension. That's from finding those advisors, from understanding their book of business, to presenting and delivering remotely, to capturing that information, to using it intelligently. So I think it will be a continued emphasis on the importance of technology, both for the advisor and the wholesaler. That will be most prominent over the next 5 years.
Brett, let's get your voice on this. What are you seeing looking out 5 years? What changes are afoot?
Yeah, Rob, just once again to build upon some of the comments from both Mark and Jon, I think clearly one of the things that inform our decisions around staffing levels and effectiveness in the field is there are going to be just fewer and larger advisory teams. And larger advisory teams, we're going to define that as those teams in excess of $500 million. And when you get above $500 million, the second key component of that, the role of the solo practitioner has just been dying out. Teams that manage larger size AUMs must by default become professionalized to deliver the efficiency and the scale necessary to run a business. And so what you have is you've got specialization, you've got the senior advisors, the managing partners of the practice, you've got research analysts that help to build the portfolios. They may or may not report up through a CIO. You've got business development, you've got client service. And what you have in effect then is almost a fully kind of integrated model providing sophisticated asset allocation and holistic wealth management. So those are some pretty big trends, because that third thing, if you start to think fewer and lesser advisors facing off against highly sophisticated, in many cases, analysts whose full job is to build diversified portfolios, that third part of that then is going to be key, which is these teams are going to be tech-driven, as Mark talked about. And we as an organization have to think about how we touch them, the delivery of the types of of research we put in front of them, and this just informs a lot about how we think through our staffing levels and how we think through effectiveness and the types of way we train our wholesalers in the field.
You know, there was a quote that came from Bing at Cerulli that I just want to bounce off you guys because it fits in this particular realm, and I'm curious how you might attack it. He said you can have a class of advisors that survives but doesn't thrive. So if the sweet spot, if the honeypot is going to be 500 million practices at 500 million and above, teams that are managing 500 million and above, how do you suppose your organizations are going to be structured 5 years out to accommodate, you know, the great masses of advisors that, you know, aren't necessarily part of the 20% that are going to elevate you to your aspirational goals, but they're still important as far as the unwashed masses? I don't know who wants to take that question. Perhaps Brett, we'll start with you because you had the mic.
Yeah, no, great question. I think very clearly three things come to mind. Number one, there's a lot of discussion amongst my peers and within the industry and folks like yourself, Rob. The delineation between channels has become less pronounced. It's much more about the quote-unquote buying behavior. And as I'll use that term again, as these teams become ensemble practices and you're facing off against specialists, it becomes more of a professional buyer integration. And so point number one, very clear, is there is a blurring of the lines of channels, and number one, and that makes it much more about the buying behavior. The second thing I think very, very clearly that comes from that is, it's much more about, understanding within an advisory practice, how are they choosing to build portfolios? Because this can become very much about where your peerless value proposition, Rob, which you talk about a lot. Is it building portfolios or is it holistic wealth management? And do I outsource portfolio construction to the home office or third-party strategy? So that second part then becomes much more about identifying the right teams that are also still involved in the business of building diversified portfolios. And I'll stop there and let Mark and John maybe to build upon that and offer their own point of view.
Yeah, so John and Mark, when you're thinking about this evolution, if you're thinking about, the top 20%, 500 million plus, and then there's the unwashed masses, as I might call them, of all the other advisors that are not thriving but surviving, how does your approach to distribution change?
Yeah, maybe I'll take this as John. I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, go.
Good.
Mark, go ahead.
So I would say uncoordinated, or not pre-planned with Brett. I think just building directly off of his comments about outsourcing, I would say that we have significant relationships with that targeted top 20%, and genuinely look at that 80% as a market segment that we can help. One of our mottos is helping advisors, and it's genuine. It comes from our heritage as a consultant, and we really work hard to help advisors continuously improve. We do it through business and book analysis, and then investment analysis, and many times the conclusion is that the advisor or even the small team could be better in whole or in part in insourcing some segment of their book to a full market strategist or model manager like us. And there's a recognition that makes their business more sustainable in the present and more valuable for future transition. So I think that demographic of the other 80%, one, it's not static, right? There's improvement that's possible, and two, it fits well for a number of us who are providing more holistic solutions.
So, John, by very nature of Mark's firm,
yeah,
they're set for that, right? I mean,
right.
it's in their DNA. But if a firm like yours isn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't necessarily in that particular angle of the business, how will you prepare then for this bifurcation, this larger distance between thems that got and thrive and thems that don't?
Well, it's an interesting question because I have an opportunity to take the other side of Brett's comment, right? Because Brett, you were going down the channels are becoming more alike and more aligned potentially. I actually would see it the other way. Channels are becoming more distinct. And so where I see an opportunity, quite honestly, is I look at, we'll stay maybe with the wirehouse channel where we are working arguably with the top advisors in the channel, and we'll continue to deepen that relationship with those advisors. It's kind of the 20% you mentioned. If I look at the independents and banks and those other areas, we see more room for growth even with our existing teams there. That said, we are deploying and will continue to deploy resources to try to tackle and testing a few ideas, quite honestly, around associate wholesalers to get to remote markets, bringing in younger talent to the marketplace that are really smart, really sharp, modern, using technology, using resources, using leverage to really get at the wider berth of advisors. But between the RIA channel and the wirehouse channel where we're working with the top advisors, we're certainly doing that in the independent channel, but particularly in the independent side where we're testing out a number of different ideas that will get us a wider berth of advisors than we're operating with today to try to get at that your description of the next 80% or some subset of that. But I go back to my beginning comment, that will not be in lieu of the fact that we have to continue to focus on the biggest and the best because they are going to continue to bring on many of those advisors into their teams. I think one of the biggest trends you're seeing now is whether they're operating alone and becoming bigger into themselves or, most likely, selling their businesses to larger roll-ups or aggregators, and the aggregators being the centralization of those decisions. We need to be with the aggregators. And coming along with that will be the $500,000 to $200,000 producer, and we need to be focused on those as well.
Let's move on to the next question, and thank you for that, Jon. So you guys sit in some of the lead chairs of some of the largest asset managers on the planet. I want to know, when you're tossing and turning about our industry, what one thing concerns you the most? What one trend concerns you the most about our industry? Brett, let's start with you. What keeps you tossing and turning when you think about the industry?
Yeah, Rob, only one?
Well,
quite a bit.
we can start with one, but we might get elsewhere. But let's start with the one that causes you the most angst.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that animate and have us think clearly, and this applies whether it's retail or institutional, and just as the winnowing pipe of opportunities. In the retail landscape, it's called platform rationalization. And God loving the wirehouses are woken up as well as other broker dealers and says, we just don't need 25 large cap value products on our menu any longer. And that's a fair response. And so less is more. On the institutional side, we're calling it strategic partnering. How does any large asset owner or large broker dealer, they're all trying to figure out a way to get less is more. And so having an organization like ours or an organization like Eaton, Vance, or Russell, it's imperative and keeps us up at night. How do we stay relevant with a broad-based set of capabilities and the ability to lean into them not only with world-class investment talent, but also as a value-add partner to give us a seat at the table and not be a position where we're getting rationalized off these platforms? That is something that we think a lot about this organization, a way to stay relevant in the current market environment.
Brett, thank you. So from a Macquarie, Delaware standpoint, we're thinking about relevancy in the face of product rationalization. That's what I heard you say is kind of the headline. Is that a fair statement?
You got it. That's the strap line you took from me, Rob. Exactly so.
Mark, what would you say is got you concerned the most about the industry today?
I'd say, Rob, we are acutely aware of all the trends, including rationalization, as Brad described. Given our inherent flexibility, our ability to allocate across and within asset classes and across internal and external managers, we have an adaptive capability that in some ways we may be less concerned than others. That said, I think from our perspective, and something we've written a lot about, a concern is the active, and I'm going to emphasize versus passive, debate. We clearly see this as active and passive. We're concerned about the trend towards passive overshooting, and that at least temporarily degrading the ability for active managers to play an important part in the capital markets ecosystem. We believe in active, we believe in the alpha, and want to see that persist. So I guess the concern centers around the continued emphasizing the continued understanding and importance of active management alongside factors, alongside passive in a full, complete portfolio.
Mark, thanks. Jon, what about you? What's got you as the number one industry trend that's got you awake and got your attention?
Absolutely. Mine might be a little more controversial, but I'll go with it. My biggest concern is the increased cost of doing business with broker-dealers continues to rise. There's an incredible amount of inflation going on there, where no other part of our business is witnessing inflation. In fact, we see nothing other than price compression. And I think the big challenge is going to be really more their own almost, is that as our cost of doing business goes up, it actually has a negative effect on our ability to lower our expenses to be more competitive with clients, more competitive with the passive approach that Mark was just alluding to. And it actually has a negative effect potentially even for the broker-dealers of more of that money, because we're going to continue to be gapped even further, more of that money likely going to passive, and only exacerbating the trend that Mark's worried about himself. So if I can't lower costs, I think there's a structural opportunity in the industry, quite honestly, where I think firms deserve to be paid for the work they're doing, and so it's not that it shouldn't be anything, but I think there's a level that it's surpassing in terms of what's rational for the overall business, and I think the inflation's over the top, in my opinion, at this stage of the game.
You know what's interesting is Jon, you speak about the cost of doing business, and then you wrap that around to the discussion of fees, which actually was quite fascinating, because if you guys are getting beat about the head and shoulders for more participation, marketing fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you do find yourself constrained about where am I supposed to get my revenue from to offset all of those dollars I have to pay out. What was interesting to me, and I just like your feedback on it kind of randomly here, if you will, from all three of you, when I went to Investment Wealth Institute, formerly IMCA, I did some survey work on the floor of the display area talking to wholesalers. And I asked them kind of a byproduct of these questions, the one thing being what one industry trend concerns you the most. And fully 75% of wholesalers said fee compression. And they said it for a host of different reasons, but that's what was echoing in the brain of our rank and file, which was fee compression. Fee compression, of course, can mean a lot of things to them, right? It can simply mean that, the firm is not as profitable, hence they have to lower my compensation. I mean, that's ultimately where the rubber meets the road for a particular wholesaler. But what are your thoughts if I just, lay that out there as one of the concerns that kind of rolls around your head, fee compression? If I just say, Brett, fee compression, how do you react to that?
Yeah, and I would say it's a fact of life right now. I think two things are maybe the position that statement. I think first, if you look at the rise of passive and the share of passive overall flows in traditional categories, that's having a downward pull on average weighted expense ratios for active management. So it's not a trend; it's just a fact. And if you look at the compression, if you think it's happened a lot in active management, look at the fee compression that's happened just in passive. Right, pronounced. You can now go out and get exposure to broad-based asset classes. For many cases, high single digit. So one of the things I think through, Rob, very clearly is just that downward pull that's occurring within asset management as the share of passive grows. And I would say as well that the risk on overall kind of compression is going to happen in the world of advice delivery as well. That Maginot line for an advisor has always been around 1%, and there's a lot of discussion around where that fee budget will be on a go-forward basis. And how you add value. So that's the reaction I have for you, Rob.
I appreciate that. Mark, what about you, this fee compression idea? When I say fee compression, you say?
I say fee and advice resilience, actually. So undoubtedly in the asset management or the AUM part of the system, there's fee compression and challenges that everybody has talked about. What is underreported somewhat is that the resilience of advice and the resilience of advice-based fees. And you can look at some recent deals as markers on that. So the Edelman Financial and Financial Engines deal really is about taking a robo and putting a human front end on top of that. There are some other robos that have brought in advisors and advice-based elements or more personal advice-based elements and raised fees. So I think that all of the concerns Brett and Jon have raised are on point, and there's undoubtedly fee compression in parts of the system. But what has been underreported is that even with technology, even with the advent of robos, the complexity of the business, the desire for advice and the willingness to pay for it has persisted.
Jon, we started this kind of side street with you and your notion about the cost of business going up. Anything else to add on the whole notion of this kind of blanket statement of fee compression?
No, I think it goes back to the same issue, right? Which is at the end of the day, and Mark was kind of alluding to this. I think there are ways to protect yourself from compression to some degree, and it has little to do with just competing straight up for price. So I think that's we've seen this in the ETF market, right? It's every day there's they just compete with each other right down to the point of getting to zero, and they'll just collect fees on security lending. I think there's a bigger opportunity around other areas, that being things like the experience that an advisor and a client has with your organization, the services you're providing, the advice that's being provided, the thought leadership you're providing. There's a value still in there that both advisors need, and I think investors would require. And I think for that, they're willing to pay a premium for it. What that premium is might still be under pressure, but there's a premium nonetheless. And I think that's the areas where in the next 5 years, I think we're going to continue to see a lot more work done in those areas that are not just let me compete on price alone.
So, Mark, let's go back to you and talk about this notion about what keeps you most excited and hopeful. Let's flip the coin. We were on the side of the coin of what's got you concerned and perhaps tossing and turning. Let's flip the coin and talk about excited and hopeful. Pick one industry trend that just gets you jazzed and keeps you jumping out of bed, ready to come to Russell.
Yeah, so I would say connecting the dots between a couple of these questions, Rob, in terms of if you believe what we just said, the resilience of advice, if you believe what we said earlier about the importance of the bullishness on wholesaling, well, if you've got a vibrant advisor business and you're bullish on wholesaling, the opportunity to connect those in the future is exciting. And it's not going to be easy, right? It's not going to be the historical, traditional, or legacy way of doing business, but it's about developing, inventing, testing, experimenting new ways of engaging with advisors, of delivering investment and business solutions, and that's what we work on every day, and that keeps us all excited, engaged, and I think that our team feels it, and the advisors we work with feel it. So it's not without challenges, undoubtedly, and also it's what makes the business interesting.
I mean, all that change brings about job security for those that engage in the right way, because you have to figure it out lest you die. Brett, what are you thinking about in terms of what you're most excited and hopeful about from one trend in our business today?
Yeah. Well, two things really kind of jump to mind that get me really excited about being in this business and coming to work each and every day. I think first, it begins where we started this conversation about there will always be, regardless of industry, a demand in the marketplace for talented individuals, salespeople that can go out and form genuine relationships, demonstrate a demonstrable kind of peerless value proposition, and deliver solutions for the client. I don't care if you're in pharmaceutical sales. I don't care if you're selling cars. I don't care if you're selling mortgages. I don't care if you're selling sophisticated financial advice. So one of the things I always feel very passionate about is the people and the opportunity it has within this business. Two other things just to say very briefly as well. We get a lot of concern. We've talked about some things that keep us up at night, platform rationalization, fee compression, et cetera. Remember, at the end of the day, there's been a lot of discussion about the challenges within within wealth management, within asset management, we're still in an enviable position. I've got friends that work in industries that have single-digit margins. We would be the envy of most every other industry when you start to think about where we are, and then the average kind of profit margin around 38%. Wonderful roads ahead of us. And then finally, someone like Mark and Jon, who has to kind of build strategy, delineate resources, try to figure out how to take your highest value proposition, which is the people you have in the field, and put them in the right position. We've never before had better tools at our system in terms of data to help inform our team to try to be at the right location at the right time with the right strategy. And so it gets sometimes pulled into AI or big data, but never before, for those firms that can capitalize it, are you better positioned in terms of trying to paint that target for the effectiveness of your sales team.
I'm grinning over here because I hear your enthusiasm, and I can't contain you to just one trend. You're just bubbling over. Jon, what about you? What one trend is keeping you jazzed and at attention?
I don't even know if it's a trend. To me, it's the core. It's the center of every reason why I've done this from day one, to be honest with you, and it's what's gotten me up for 20-plus years, is a really simple one. Investors continue to need advice. Yeah. And I'm fired up for that. And you think about it, today and even in the future more than ever, they're going to continue to need help navigating really complex parts of their lives, and it's only getting more complex. We make it complex. Taxes and policy issues and policy changes and all these things continue to create demographic issues. They continue to need tools to manage all these different elements. And so whether robo or no robo, or whether advisor inclusion, which will likely continue from an asset manager perspective, to put my lens on it, they need help with taxes. They need help with income. They need to preserve their wealth. There's all sorts of issues that they're going to continue to face, and I'm super bullish on that need, and I think that need will only continue to grow from here. So for me, that's the biggest trend. I don't know if it's a trend. I think it's the core of why you get up every single day.
Absolutely. All right, so this is the part of the two questions that come now. You could argue we're best served for me having a one-on-one conversation with any one of you without the others on the telephone. But so we're going to ask some things about yourselves that from a personal standpoint, a business personal standpoint, if you will, we want to know more about. So I'm going to flip the questions in terms of order just a little bit. The first question is, who is your greatest career influencer, and why do you consider them to be that way? Brett, let's start with you.
Yeah, Rob, I think back now after 2 decades plus within the business, one of the greatest career influencers that I had was growing up as a young man playing sports, and had the good fortune to play football at a high level at an organization here in Pennsylvania called Penn State Football. Have a lot of pride being at linebacker U, and the thing that's helped keep me in good stead throughout my career is understanding that when you get knocked down, you get back up. You get knocked down, you get back up. And it's that level of grit and tenacity, I think if anyone can learn from that, is something that's been incredibly important for me throughout my career.
Thank you, Brett. Mark, what about you? Who is your greatest career influencer, and why?
So I would take a little liberty with the question, Rob, and say one of the most influential pieces of advice that I've heard very early in my career in sales, and it stayed with me to today, is to show up, have an informed opinion, and follow up. Like those three things: show up, have an informed opinion, follow up. Like as technologically sophisticated as we talk about the business getting, if we can relay that to our new teammates, our new associates, and they can take it to heart and animate it, it's the most valuable and greatest career advice I received.
I appreciate that. Do you see how you guys are? You see how you senior guys are? I'm asking you a question about who is your greatest career influencer, and it turns into not invaluable, very valuable wisdom that you're sharing. Okay, Moninger, your chance to bring us to the answer of the question: who is or was your greatest career influencer, and why?
So, because we're not great at following directions, I'm going to give you two. So, So let me start with my old man. So my dad, and these are easy ones, but this is, in all sincerity, I don't know a single person, he's 81 today, who has a stronger work ethic than this character. The curiosity of what I can't even imagine that has any more curiosity than this guy. A risk taker, relentless, principle-based, and a consultant long, long ago. And the one piece of advice he gave me early on, there were two, but one really important one was learn money, you can run any business in the world. So his suggestion was he didn't finish high school, so he was like, learn how money works, and you can literally run any business in the world. And the other one, to Brett's point, was I raced professional motocross, and one of the features of my first race is I crashed my brains out, and he had me get up and say, you just got to finish what you committed to. And just finish what you committed to. And that was a big lesson for me. I've never given that up since. And then the other one is one I live with every single day is my wife. And believe it or not, she challenges me in all aspects of my career every day, and therefore makes me better every day. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, in all sincerity, she'll sit at the back of a room, and I'll ask, any one of people how I did in a session, and yeah, I did great, and she'll go, no, there's 3 or 4 things you can work on and be better, and that's legit. And I sincerely appreciate that. She literally makes me better every day. So I'd say those 2 people have been the most influential.
Thank you for sharing those, Jon Moniker. Do you, Brett, Mark, any chance you want to revisit with a particular individual in mind? Not to put you on the spot, but we really think it's a good question to ask. Apparently not. Okay, so let's move on to the very last question. And the very last question is, what 3 things would your today self tell your newer to the industry self about how to succeed, thrive, or get ahead? Brett, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so, thinking about this, Rob, and something, if I had a chance to visit my younger self, and things I think about a lot today, the 3 things are very, very clear. Number 1, just be self-aware. The quicker you can come to a determination of what you do really well, areas in your life you need to build upon, triggers in your life, impact you have on others, culture that you like to succeed in, things you're looking to improve on. That self-awareness, that understanding of the toolkit you bring to any employer, the things that you do really well, sometimes referred to as signature strengths. That takes sometimes people a lot of time. Get to the point of self-awareness quick. Second, and Rob, this is one of the things I love about your podcast. People spend a lot of time. They go to school, they get out of college, and great, I'm gonna go to work now. But you have to be a lifelong learner. And never before have you had more opportunities, not only with books but podcasts, TV, etc. Be someone that's continuously curious. Never hold for status quo. Get better each and every year. Continue to be a lifelong learner. And the third thing, in life, you give far if you take an others approach. Give more than you take. People want to be around people that generally are there to try to make the world a better place, that lean in as the other person's perspective in mind, as opposed to a myopic kind of centeredness around themselves. And those are things that come to me throughout the years that I hold dear.
Thank you for those 3 genuine and thoughtful answers. Mark, what about you? What 3 things would your today self tell your newer to this industry self about how to succeed and thrive and get ahead?
Yeah, so I'll try to be more rigid with this one and give you 3. So first one is to build stackable attributes unique to yourself. And I think when we enter the business, you find somebody, to your earlier question about someone influential or a role model, and you're saying, I want to be like that person. And I think the most successful people identify that person and then build upon it with their unique traits and capabilities into a unique stack of attributes that makes them different from everybody else. So find the capabilities and attributes that represent you best and build them into this unique stack. That's one. The second would be get comfortable being uncomfortable. Brett and Jon both talked about sports. I have a lot of sports endeavors myself, and whether it's sports or business, I think the notion of getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, operating at that level, and then being able to bring yourself to higher levels of competition is something invaluable. Don't shy away from uncomfortable engagement situations or challenges. That uncomfortable feeling leads to growth and development. And then closely related to that, I think there's a book about this, and it's something that's resonated. The obstacle is the way. If there's something in front of you, and you talk about this in some of your podcasts, if there's a call you don't want to make, a meeting you don't want to take, and you know you have to do it first. Go to those things that in your mind are an obstacle. Take them head on, and learn and develop from them.
Mark, those are awesome. Thank you for sharing those. Jon, what about you? What three things would you tell your today self? What would your today self tell your newer to the industry self about how to succeed, thrive, and get ahead?
Yeah, the good news is I have a little bit of overlap with both Brett and Mark, and so the first one kind of goes together is curiosity and learning, and I think Brett hit that pretty hard, which is, I think it really serves you well to be incredibly curious about all aspects of our business. And I think coinciding with that is to be a constant learner in all aspects of the business, and particularly not boxing yourself in being one-dimensional. I think it's one of the biggest risks you see is that you become so boxed into this one thing you're really, really good at. I think leadership ultimately requires a combination of expertise and broad perspective, and I think that's what being both curious and a lifelong learner will give you. Mark alluded to the fact of, in my words, was challenging yourself. I think it is always about pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. It certainly makes you stronger and more valuable over time because you'll experience more. Now, the more you challenge yourself, the more you're going to take those risks, and you're going to learn lessons. Sometimes hard ones, and many times really good ones. And then the final one, which might be a little bit different, but I think it's one that I've leaned into many years ago, is build a track record. And I think the most important thing is I think about as a hiring person, I buy track records for a living. So I look at people and say, what's your what have you done to prove what you've been able to do? And I think Mark alluded to a little bit of this is you can also be a specialist in what you do. What is I like the word you use, Mark, stackable attributes that help you develop that track record. I think is equally important to having one is how you developed it. So I think a lot about track record. At the end of the day, we serve shareholders in many capacities of our businesses, and what they're looking for is us to perform. And I want to, every day I get up, I think about how we're going to perform and do exactly that. And I track it, I measure it, I focus on it, because at the end of the day, that's what they're hiring us for. And I think that's one you can carry with you for the rest of your career.
Jon, thank you for sharing those. On behalf of the listening audience, which because this is going to be broadcast both on our feed and through MMI, I know will include internal wholesalers, external wholesalers, divisional managers, national sales leaders, senior leaders, C-suite executives. On behalf of all those listening, I really want to thank you guys, because no one can underestimate what your calendars look like. To corral you all into one space for an hour to have this thoughtful conversation is an honor on my part and a real treat. So I thank you for that on behalf of our entire audience. So thank you. And wholesalers, I'm going to invite you to come back next time for another episode of Lessons from Leaders here at the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. For more information about Wholesaler Masterminds, visit us at wholesalermasterminds.com. Find the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify.